Choose any woman you want, the towering sheriff bellowed to the weathered rancher, gesturing toward three bound figures in the dusty square. But when his calloused finger pointed at the black woman, gasps rippled through the crowd. They saw nothing but shame in her dark skin and heavy frame, whispering she'd be dead within the month from neglect or worse. The widowed rancher stood silent, haunted eyes studying each woman while his twin daughters clutched his legs, mysteriously whispering about the singing lady. His failing ranch demanded help he couldn't afford, yet something deeper stirred, a buried memory neither he nor his children could fully grasp. Their fates had crossed before in ways that would shatter everything the town believed about worth, survival, and the debts we owe to strangers who save us. Would choosing her doom them both, or unlock the salvation they'd all been seeking? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Ruth Franklin's worn boots stirred dust clouds as she walked down Millbrook's main street. Store owners slammed shutters. Women pulled their children closer. Men spat into the dirt. She needed work. Any work. The last of her coins had bought yesterday's bread. At Henderson's general store, she pushed open the door. The bell's chime drew every eye. Conversations died. "We don't serve your kind here," Henderson said, without looking up from his ledger. Ruth's shoulders stayed straight. "I can pay." "Not interested." He finally raised his head. "Move along." The saloon wouldn't hire her, neither would the laundry. By afternoon, Sheriff Harding found her sitting on a crate behind the blacksmith shop, sharing her last piece of bread with a stray dog. "Vagrancy," he announced, metal handcuffs catching sunlight. "Disturbing the peace." "I've disturbed nothing." "Tell it to the judge." His smile held no warmth. "Assuming we get one through here any time soon." The jail cell smelled of rust and fear. Two other women huddled in the shadows. Mary, barely 20, picked at her fingernails. Rosa muttered prayers in Spanish. Both had been there 3 days already. "What did you do?" Mary asked. "Existed," Ruth replied. Miles away, Eli Monroe stared at his empty pantry. His twin daughters, Emily and Sarah, sat at the kitchen table drawing with charcoal. The ranch house needed repairs he couldn't afford. Fence posts leaned at dangerous angles. Half his cattle had wandered off last week. "Papa, I'm hungry," Sarah said. Emily nodded. "The oats taste funny." Eli had been feeding them horse oats mixed with the last of the flour. His wife had died giving birth to them 7 years ago. He'd managed alone until this year when everything started falling apart. "We'll figure something out," he said. That night, both girls woke screaming. Emily thrashed in her bed, calling out about cold and snow. Sarah cried for someone to sing. These nightmares happened twice a week. Always the same fragments, always mentioning a woman they'd never met. "The blanket lady," Emily whimpered. "Where's the blanket lady?" "She sang to us," Sarah added, "when everything was white." Eli held them until dawn broke. He had no answers for their dreams. The next morning, Sheriff Harding knocked on Eli's door. Behind him stood Mayor Collins and 3 other men. "We've got a solution to your problems, Monroe," Harding said. 3 women in jail. Need husbands more than they need trials." "I don't understand." "Choose one. Take her as your wife. She gets a home. You get help with your girls in this place." Harding gestured at the sagging porch roof. "Better than letting them rot in cells." Mayor Collins nodded. "It's practical. Christian thing to do." Eli studied their faces. "What's the alternative for them?" "Hard to say. Could be months before a circuit judge comes through. Prison wagon might take them to territorial court eventually." Harding shrugged. "Might not survive the journey." Emily tugged on Eli's shirt. "Can we see them, Papa?" Something in her voice made him pause. "Why?" "I dreamed about a singing lady again." An hour later, half the town had gathered in the square. 3 women stood tied to posts. Mary kept her head down. Rosa's lips moved in silent prayer. Ruth stood straight, meeting every stare with quiet dignity. Choose any woman you want, Sheriff Harding announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several men nodded toward Mary. Young, pretty, manageable. Emily grabbed Sarah's hand. They walked closer to the posts, studying each face. When they reached Ruth, both girls stopped. "It's her," Emily whispered. "The singing lady," Sarah breathed. Ruth looked down at them. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition? Confusion? She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. "Papa," Emily called. "This one. She's the one from our dreams." The crowd's murmur turned to shocked silence. Eli approached slowly. Ruth watched him without fear, without pleading, just patient acceptance of whatever came next. "You sure?" he asked his daughters. Both girls nodded vigorously. Sheriff Harding stepped forward. "Monroe, think carefully. The young one would serve you better." "She sang to us when we were cold," Sarah said clearly. "She kept us warm." Ruth's eyes widened, her breathing quickened. Eli pulled out his knife and cut Ruth's ropes. "I choose her." Gasps erupted from the watching crowd. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men shook their heads in disgust. "You've lost your mind," someone shouted. "Those girls have filled your head with nonsense," another voice called. Ruth rubbed her wrists where the ropes had chafed. She looked at Eli with something between gratitude and bewilderment. "Thank you," she said quietly. As they walked toward his wagon, Emily and Sarah flanked Ruth like protective guards. The crowd parted reluctantly. Harsh whispers followed their every step. Ruth climbed onto the wagon seat. The girls settled beside her. Emily reached for Ruth's hand without hesitation. Sarah leaned against her arm. For the first time in 3 years, Ruth smiled. Sheriff Harding watched the wagon disappear down the dusty road. His jaw clenched. Mayor Collins approached. "This won't end well," Collins muttered. "No," Harding agreed. "It won't." Ruth surveyed the Monroe ranch house with practical eyes. Dishes piled in the sink, clothes scattered across floors. The pantry held mostly empty shelves and hope. She rolled up her sleeves. By evening, order had emerged from chaos. Clean dishes gleamed on shelves. Laundry hung on lines she'd repaired herself. The girls ate their first proper meal in weeks. Beans and cornbread made from ingredients she'd somehow stretched into abundance. "How did you do that?" Eli asked, watching his daughters actually smile while eating. "Magic," Ruth replied, but her eyes held ancient wisdom about making much from little. Emily and Sarah helped her clear the table. They moved around Ruth naturally, as if they'd known her forever. When Sarah stumbled with a heavy plate, Ruth caught it without looking. When Emily reached for something too high, Ruth handed it down before she asked. Eli noticed everything. That night, Ruth hummed while washing dishes, a low, soothing melody that seemed to rise from somewhere deep in memory. Both girls stopped their playing to listen. "That song," Emily whispered. "I know that song." "She sang it when everything was cold," Sarah added dreamily. Ruth's hand stilled in the soapy water. The melody died on her lips. The next morning brought visitors. Henderson from the general store climbed down from his wagon, his face grim. Behind him rode Mayor Collins and 2 other shopkeepers. "Monroe, we need to talk," Henderson called. Eli stepped onto the porch. Ruth continued hanging laundry, but her movements grew careful, watchful. "That woman can't shop in our stores," Collins announced. "Decent folks won't stand for it." "She needs supplies like anyone else," Eli replied. "She needs to know her place." Henderson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "This whole arrangement is unseemly." Ruth kept pinning shirts to the line. Emily and Sarah played nearby, building towers from old wooden blocks. The normalcy felt fragile as spun glass. "My arrangements are my own business," Eli said, "not when they affect the whole community." Collins wiped sweat from his forehead. "People are talking, Monroe, saying you've lost your judgment since your wife died." Eli's jaw tightened. "Get off my land." After they left, Ruth found him sitting on the porch steps. She settled beside him without invitation. "I can leave," she said quietly. Spare you this trouble. Where would you go? She had no answer. They both knew the truth. A woman alone, with her appearance and background, had few safe options in this territory. Besides, Eli added, watching his daughters laugh as they played, look at them. Haven't seen them this happy in months. Ruth watched too. Emily was teaching Sarah a clapping game, both girls giggling at their mistakes. Simple joy in a hard world. They're good children, Ruth said. They like you. More than like. It's like they've been waiting for you. Eli turned to study her profile. Those dreams they have, about someone singing to them in the cold. You know something about that. Ruth's hands folded carefully in her lap. Children have active imaginations. These aren't imagination. They remember details, specific things. Eli leaned forward. Who are you, Ruth Franklin? Before she could answer, Emily ran up to them. Mama Ruth, can you sing the warm song again? The word mama hung in the air like a bell's echo. Emily had never called her that before. Ruth's breath caught. I don't know what song you mean, child. The one from when we were little. When the snow was everywhere and we were so cold. Emily climbed onto Ruth's lap with complete trust. You wrapped us up and sang until the white went away. Ruth's arms circled the girl instinctively. Sarah approached and leaned against Ruth's knee. You kept us safe, Sarah added, even when you got sleepy too. Eli watched Ruth's face transform. Confusion gave way to something deeper. Recognition dawned slowly, like sunrise breaking over mountains. How old are you girls? Ruth asked carefully. 7, they answered together. And when is your birthday? February, Emily said. Papa says we were born during the big storm, the one that lasted for days. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she smoothed Emily's hair. The big storm, she repeated softly. That evening, while the girls played with corn-husk dolls Ruth had made them, Eli found her standing by the barn. She stared at the horizon where purple shadows gathered. You remember something, he said. Maybe. I'm not certain. Ruth wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. 3 years ago, I was traveling through these parts. Got caught in a blizzard that lasted 4 days. Eli waited. Found something in the snow. 2 little ones, nearly frozen in an overturned wagon. Her voice grew distant. Wrapped them in my blanket. Sang to keep them awake. Keep them fighting. What happened then? I passed out from the cold. When I woke up, they were gone. Figured they'd died and someone had taken the bodies. Ruth's eyes remained fixed on the darkening sky. Carried that guilt for 3 years. Eli's throat worked silently. Finally, he spoke. I found 2 girls wrapped in a brown blanket. Used that blanket to track back, looking for whoever had saved them. Never found anyone. They stood in shared silence as the first stars appeared. Inside the house, Emily and Sarah sang Ruth's humming melody, their voices sweet and clear in the evening air. Ruth had saved his daughters' lives once already. Now, somehow, they were saving hers in return. But the town's hostility was growing, and Sheriff Harding had been asking too many questions about Ruth's past. The fever struck on a Tuesday morning. Emily woke burning hot, her small body shaking with chills. Within hours, Sarah showed the same symptoms. Red rash bloomed across their skin like scattered rose petals. Scarlet fever. Eli rode hard to town for the doctor. Dr. Patterson listened to his desperate plea, then shook his head. Can't treat children in a house with that woman, Patterson said. Decent folks won't stand for it. They're dying. Bring them to town. Leave her behind. Eli's hands clenched into fists. No. He returned empty-handed. Ruth had already moved both girls into the main bedroom. Cool cloths covered their foreheads. She'd opened windows to create cross-ventilation. A pot of herbs simmered on the stove, filling the air with medicinal steam. Willow bark for the fever, she explained without looking up from Emily's bedside. Elderflower and mint for the breathing. Where did you learn this? My grandmother. She delivered babies and tended sick folks for 50 years. Ruth adjusted Sarah's blankets. These girls are strong. They'll fight through it. For 3 days, Ruth never left their side. She spooned broth between cracked lips. She changed sweat-soaked sheets. She sang her humming melody when they cried out in pain. On the third night, both girls began talking in their sleep. "So cold," Emily mumbled. "Everything's white. Can't see Papa." Sarah thrashed weakly. The wagon tipped over. "Mary's not moving anymore." Ruth froze. Mary had been their nursemaid, killed instantly when the wagon overturned in the blizzard 3 years ago. These fever dreams were pulling up buried memories. "Someone's coming," Emily whispered, her eyes still closed. "A lady. She's got a brown blanket." "She's singing," Sarah added. "The warm song. Makes the cold go away." Ruth's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Eli, who sat rigid in his chair. Emily's voice grew clearer despite her fever. "She wrapped us up tight. Said we had to stay awake. Had to keep talking to her." "Tell me your names," Sarah repeated in a dreamy voice, mimicking someone else's words. "Tell me about your papa. Tell me what you like to eat." The girls had been delirious for hours, but these conversations felt different. Too detailed, too specific. "She sang for so long," Emily continued. "Even when she got sleepy, too. Even when her voice got quiet." Sarah's hand reached out, grasping air. "Don't leave us, blanket lady. Don't get sleepy." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. She remembered those exact words. Remembered the desperation in two small voices as hypothermia tried to claim her. "But she did get sleepy," Emily whispered. "She fell down in the snow." "We thought she was dead," Sarah added. "We cried and cried." Ruth covered her mouth with trembling hands. She had collapsed, overcome by cold and exhaustion. The last thing she remembered was the girls' frightened sobs before darkness took her. "Then Papa found us," Emily continued in her fever dream. "He wrapped us in the blanket lady's blanket. It smelled like her song." Eli leaned forward. "What did Papa say when he found you?" Sarah answered as if he'd spoken in her dream. "He said, 'Thank God. Someone saved you. Someone wrapped you up and kept you alive.'" Ruth stood abruptly and walked to the window. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the same landscape where she'd nearly died saving these children. The irony struck her like a physical blow. She'd spent 3 years believing she'd failed them. They'd spent 3 years dreaming about the woman who'd saved their lives. "You remember?" Eli said quietly behind her. Ruth nodded without turning around. Every detail, their little faces blue with cold, the way Emily kept trying to close her eyes, how Sarah hummed along when I sang. She pressed her palm against the cool glass. "I used every trick my grandmother taught me to keep them conscious, talked to them for hours about anything I could think of. The wagon was completely overturned. Mary was already gone. If you hadn't found them when you did, I passed out maybe 50 feet from where they lay. Figured wolves would get us all." Ruth's voice barely carried across the room. "Woke up 2 days later in a Shoshone camp. They'd found me half dead in the snow. I searched for days looking for whoever had saved them, followed the trail of that brown blanket as far as I could track." Eli joined her at the window. "Never imagined you'd survive." Emily stirred in her bed. "Mama Ruth?" Both adults turned. Emily's fever had broken, her eyes focused clearly for the first time in days. "You're the blanket lady," she said with absolute certainty. "You saved us in the snow." Sarah's eyes opened too. "We knew. Deep down, we always knew." Ruth returned to their bedside and knelt between both beds. "Yes, I'm the blanket lady, and you're my brave little girls who fought so hard to stay awake." Emily reached out and touched Ruth's cheek. "You didn't leave us. You just got lost for a while." Sarah smiled weakly. "But Papa brought you home." Over the next 2 days, both girls recovered completely. Their strength returned along with their appetites. They clung to Ruth constantly, as if afraid she might disappear again. But the town's anger had only grown during their illness. Sheriff Harding visited daily, asking pointed questions about Ruth's background. Store owners refused any contact with the Monroe family. Even the preacher crossed the street to avoid them. Ruth had saved Eli's daughters twice now, but darker forces were gathering, and her past was catching up faster than any of them realized. The town meeting drew every adult within 10 miles. They packed into Henderson's store, voices rising like angry wasps. Mayor Collins pounded his fist on the counter for order. "This situation has gone too far," he announced. "The Monroe arrangement threatens our community's moral foundation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ruth sat in the back corner, spine straight despite hostile stares. Eli stood beside her, jaw set for battle. Sheriff Harding rose from his chair near the front. "The law requires proper marriage for child custody. Monroe's current arrangement lacks legal standing." "What's that supposed to mean?" Eli demanded. "Means those girls could be removed from an unsuitable household." Harding's smile held sharp edges. "Unless you make this woman your legal wife." The crowd erupted. Some shouted approval. Others protested the very suggestion. Ruth remained silent, studying Harding's face with growing unease. Mrs. Henderson stood up. "Decent women won't associate with such arrangements. Our children shouldn't be exposed to this moral corruption." "Those girls nearly died from fever," Eli shot back. "Ruth saved their lives." "So she claims," Harding interrupted. "But who knows what really happened? We only have her word about this supposed rescue." Emily and Sarah pressed closer to Ruth's sides. They'd insisted on coming despite Eli's protests. Now their small faces showed confusion at the adults' anger. "She sang to us," Emily said clearly, "when everything was cold and white." "Children's imagination," Harding dismissed. "Fever dreams mixed with stories." Ruth's hands tightened in her lap. Something in Harding's tone triggered warning bells. He was pushing too hard, asking too many specific questions about her past. After the meeting dispersed with no resolution, Eli loaded his family into their wagon. The drive home passed in tense silence until Sarah spoke up. "Why doesn't Sheriff Harding like Mama Ruth?" Ruth's breath caught at the title. The girls had started using it naturally without prompting or permission. "Some people don't like change," Eli said carefully. That evening, while the girls played with wooden dolls Ruth had carved them, she sat with Eli on the porch steps. Stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky. "There's something I need to tell you," Ruth said, "about why I was traveling through these parts 3 years ago." Eli waited. "I was married once, to a good man named Thomas Franklin. He was a blacksmith in a town called Cedar Falls, about 60 miles south of here." Ruth's voice grew distant with memory. "Thomas treated everyone with respect, regardless of their station or color. Made him popular with some folks, hated by others." "What happened to him?" "Sheriff Harding happened to him." Eli turned sharply. "Harding? He was deputy sheriff in Cedar Falls then. Took a liking to me that I didn't return." Ruth pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Started making visits when Thomas was working, bringing me gifts I didn't want, making suggestions I ignored." A coyote howled in the distance. Ruth waited for its cry to fade before continuing. "One night, Thomas came home beaten half to death. Said Harding had cornered him at the saloon, told him to keep his woman in line." Her hands clasped tightly together. "Thomas was gentle by nature, but he had his limits. Told Harding to stay away from our home. Harding didn't take that well. 2 days later, I found Thomas dead in his workshop. Someone had struck him with his own hammer. Blood everywhere." Ruth's voice remained steady, but her knuckles had gone white. "Harding arrived with witnesses before I'd even finished screaming." Eli felt ice forming in his stomach. "They said I'd killed him in a jealous rage, had witnesses who swore they'd heard us fighting, found the hammer in our kitchen with my fingerprints on it." Ruth stared at her hands. "Of course my fingerprints were on it. I'd helped Thomas in the workshop dozens of times. But you escaped." "Barely. Old Mrs. Garcia saw Harding planting evidence in our kitchen. She helped me slip out the back while he was arresting me in the front." Ruth's smile held no humor. "Been running ever since. Living on odd jobs and charity. Helping folks when I could." Inside the house, Emily's laughter rang out as Sarah told her a story. Normal childhood sounds in an increasingly dangerous situation. That's why Harding keeps asking questions, Eli realized. He knows who you are. He knew the moment he saw me tied to that post. Probably arranged the whole setup. Ruth stood and walked to the porch railing. I should leave before I bring more trouble down on you and the girls. Running didn't work the first time. Staying might get you killed. They stood in troubled silence until Emily appeared in the doorway. Mama Ruth, there's a man riding up the road. Eli grabbed his rifle from inside the house. Ruth positioned herself between the girls and the approaching rider. But as the horseman came closer, moonlight revealed an unfamiliar face. The stranger was tall and lean, with skin the same warm brown as Ruth's. He rode with easy confidence, but his eyes never stopped scanning for threats. "You Ruth Franklin?" he called from horseback. Ruth stepped forward cautiously. "Depends who's asking." The man dismounted and removed his hat. His face was older than Ruth's, but shared her strong jaw and intelligent eyes. "Name's Caleb Franklin. I've been looking for my little sister for 3 long years." Ruth's legs nearly gave out. Eli caught her arm as she swayed. "Caleb?" she whispered. "They told me you were dead, killed in a railroad accident. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Caleb's grin split his weathered face. "Though finding you alive is the best news I've had since this whole nightmare started." He reached into his saddlebags and pulled out a leather portfolio thick with papers. "I've got evidence, Ruth. Enough to clear your name and put Harding behind bars where he belongs." Caleb spread documents across Eli's kitchen table like a winning poker hand. 3 years of careful investigation lay before them in ink and sworn testimony. "Started tracking Harding the day I heard about Thomas," Caleb explained. "Railroad job gave me access to towns all across the territory. Found a pattern." Ruth leaned over forged land deeds bearing Harding's distinctive handwriting, property transfers that had made him wealthy while original owners mysteriously disappeared or died. "He's been running the same schemes for years," Caleb continued. "Frame someone for murder, steal their land, move to the next town when things get hot." Eli examined a witness statement from a woman in Silver Creek. "Says here Harding killed her husband over a mining claim. 3 similar cases in 4 different towns. Always the same method. Always targets people who can't fight back easily." Caleb pulled out a small wooden box. "But this is the real prize." Inside lay a wax cylinder recording device, the kind used by traveling salesmen to demonstrate phonographs. Caleb fitted it carefully onto a portable player. "Took me 2 years to track down Sally Morrison. She worked the saloon circuit, knew Harding from his drinking days." He adjusted the needle. "Got him talking one night in Cheyenne. Thought he was impressing her with his cleverness." The cylinder began to turn. Static crackled. Then Harding's voice emerged, slurred with whiskey but unmistakably clear. "That blacksmith thought he owned her, but she was meant for me. Had to teach him about taking what ain't his." Harding's recorded laughter chilled the room. "Hammer worked real good. Made it look like she did it too. Perfect crime, Sally girl, perfect crime." Ruth's hands trembled as her husband's murder confession played in their kitchen. Emily and Sarah had been sent to bed, but she could hear them whispering in their room about the stranger who looked like Mama Ruth. "There's more," the recording continued. "Land office never checks signatures too close. Change a few names on deeds, file the right papers, and dead men's property becomes mine. Been working this scheme across 3 territories." Caleb stopped the cylinder. He confessed to 8 murders and dozens of land frauds, all recorded, all admissible in territorial court. "How did you survive the railroad accident?" Ruth asked. "Wasn't on the train. Supervisor sent me ahead to survey track conditions. Found out about the accident when I got back to camp." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Someone spread word I was dead. Figured it was safer to stay that way until I had evidence." Eli studied the documents. "This is enough to hang him. Already contacted federal marshals. They're riding down from Fort Collins." Caleb packed the papers carefully. "Should arrive tomorrow." That night, Ruth couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching shadows move across the yard. Somewhere out there, Harding was planning his next move. He wouldn't surrender quietly. Dawn brought visitors. Sheriff Harding rode up with Mayor Collins and 6 armed men. They positioned themselves around the house like they were expecting a war. "Come out, Monroe," Harding called. Time to settle this situation properly. Eli stepped onto the porch with his rifle. Ruth stood behind him, Caleb flanking her other side. "Nothing to settle," Eli replied. "Got word there's a wanted fugitive in your house. Ruth Franklin, wanted for murder in Cedar Falls." Harding's voice carried across the yard. "Gonna have to take her in." "She's not going anywhere," Caleb announced, stepping into view. Harding's face went white. "Caleb Franklin died in a train wreck." "Disappointed?" Caleb held up the leather portfolio. "Brought some interesting reading material from my travels." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Emily and Sarah peered through the window, sensing danger, but not understanding its nature. Mayor Collins shifted nervously. "Harding, maybe we should wait for proper authorities." "I am the proper authority," Harding snapped, but sweat beaded his forehead. Caleb opened the portfolio and pulled out the wax cylinder. "Want to hear something interesting, Mayor? Recording of our sheriff confessing to multiple murders?" "That's impossible," Collins stammered. "Play it," one of the armed men called. "Let's hear what he's got." Caleb set up the phonograph on the porch railing. Harding's drunken confession filled the morning air, each word hitting like a physical blow. The armed men exchanged glances. Mayor Collins backed away from Harding. "Lies," Harding sputtered. "Anyone can fake those things." "Explain the forged land deeds then." Caleb held up documents. "Your handwriting on dozens of fraudulent property transfers." "And the witness statements," Ruth added, finding her voice. "People saw you plant evidence in my kitchen the night Thomas died." The circle of support around Harding crumbled. His own men lowered their weapons. Mayor Collins openly stared at the sheriff like he was seeing a stranger. 3 years I've been gathering evidence," Caleb announced. "Every crime, every victim, every lie documented and verified." Dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Federal marshals rode hard toward the ranch, badges glinting in morning sunlight. Harding made a desperate grab for his gun. Eli's rifle swung toward him, but the sheriff's own deputies tackled him first. Mayor Collins helped pin his arms. "Ray Harding, you're under arrest for murder and fraud," the lead marshal announced as he dismounted. "We'll be taking you to territorial court for trial." As they loaded Harding into a prison wagon, he looked back at Ruth with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes, it is," Ruth replied calmly. "It's been over since the day you killed my husband." The wagon rolled away, taking 3 years of fear and injustice with it. Ruth felt something lift from her shoulders that she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what freedom felt like. Emily and Sarah ran from the house and wrapped their arms around her waist. "Is the bad man gone, Mama Ruth?" Sarah asked. "Forever," Ruth promised, meaning it completely. The territorial court's verdict came down 3 weeks later. Guilty on 8 counts of murder. Guilty on 47 counts of fraud. Ray Harding would hang at sunrise. Ruth received the news while kneading bread in her kitchen. She felt no satisfaction, only a quiet settling of accounts long overdue. Caleb had stayed at the ranch, helping with repairs and getting reacquainted with the sister he'd thought was lost forever. He'd accepted the deputy sheriff position, bringing honest law enforcement to Millbrook for the first time in years. "What will you do now?" he asked Ruth one evening, as they watched Emily and Sarah chase fireflies in the yard. Ruth considered the question. Her name was cleared. Her brother was alive. She could go anywhere, start fresh without the weight of false accusations. "I don't know," she admitted, but Eli had been thinking about the future too. That night, after the girls were asleep, he led Ruth to the barn. By lantern light, he showed her what he'd been carving into the wooden door. 4 names in careful script: Eli, Ruth, Emily, Sarah. Below them he'd added, "The Monroe family." Ruth traced the letters with her fingertip. "You're asking me to stay." I'm asking you to be part of something permanent, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because we need you. The girls need you. Eli set down his carving knife. I need you. As what? Hired help? A convenience? As family. Real family. The kind built on choice instead of obligation. He gestured at the carved names. You saved my daughter's lives twice. First in the blizzard, then from the fever. But they've saved something in you too. Ruth looked through the barn door at the house where warm light glowed in the windows. Emily had left one of her wooden dolls on the porch steps. Sarah's drawings covered the kitchen walls, evidence of childhood and safety and belonging. I've been running for 3 years, she said quietly. Not sure I remember how to stay still. We'll figure it out together. Ruth smiled, really smiled, for the first time since Thomas died. Yes, I'll stay. The community's acceptance came slowly, but it came. Dr. Patterson sheepishly offered his services after Ruth helped deliver the blacksmith's difficult baby. Store owners began serving her when they realized her money spent just like anyone else's. The preacher awkwardly invited the Monroe family to Sunday services. Mrs. Henderson still crossed the street to avoid Ruth, but her daughter always waved when she thought her mother wasn't looking. Ruth established herself as the town's unofficial healer, using skills her grandmother had taught her decades ago. She delivered babies, treated fevers, and set broken bones. People who'd once scorned her began arriving at her door seeking help their official doctor couldn't provide. Funny how opinions change, Caleb observed, watching Ruth tend to a rancher's infected wound. Fear changes faster than hearts, Ruth replied, but kindness works on both. The seasons turned. Summer heat gave way to autumn colors, then winter's first snow. Ruth watched the white flakes fall with different eyes now. Snow had once nearly killed her and the children she'd saved. Now it meant Christmas preparations and warm fires and stories told while wind howled outside. Emily and Sarah had grown taller, their faces losing baby roundness. They helped Ruth with her healing work, learning to prepare poultices and identify useful plants. Both girls showed aptitude for the medical arts. Will you teach us everything Grandmama taught you? Emily asked one afternoon while grinding willow bark. Everything I can remember, Ruth promised. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new calves. Eli proposed formally on a Sunday morning after church, kneeling in their kitchen while the girls giggled behind their hands. Ruth said yes, not from desperation or convenience, but from love that had grown slowly like deep roots finding water. They married quietly in their parlor, with Caleb officiating and the girls as witnesses. No grand celebration, just the binding of lives already intertwined beyond legal formality. Now it's official, Sarah announced solemnly after the brief ceremony. It was official the day Papa chose you, Emily corrected. This just makes the papers right. Summer brought their first anniversary as a complete family. Ruth sat on the porch at sunset, watching Eli teach the girls how to repair fence posts. Caleb rode up from town with news about a horse thief he'd captured. Normal problems, normal solutions, normal life. Emily ran up with a bouquet of prairie flowers she'd picked. For Mama Ruth, because you stayed. Because you chose us back, Sarah added, settling beside Ruth on the porch swing. Ruth accepted the flowers and breathed their sweet scent. Wild roses and Indian paintbrush and lupine. Beautiful things that thrived in harsh conditions, like families forged from unexpected choices. Tell us the story again, Emily requested. About how Papa found us in the snow. And how you wrapped us in your blanket, Sarah continued. Ruth began the familiar tale, but now it had a different ending. Not tragedy and separation, but reunion and belonging. Not a woman alone in the wilderness, but a mother surrounded by the children she'd saved and the man who'd seen her worth when the world saw only shame. Eli joined them as the story concluded, settling beside Ruth on the swing. 4 names carved on the barn door. 4 lives bound by choice and love and the simple miracle of finding home in unexpected places. The sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of hope and belonging. while Ruth's voice carried across the prairie, no longer singing for survival, but for joy.